Welcome to CIT 130, talking about looping. So let's get into objectives this week. We're going to learn about loop structure, create while loops, the use of shortcut arithmetic operators, for loops, do while loops, nest loops, and improve loop performance. So loop, what is loop? It's a structure that allows repeated execution of a block of statements. It's something that just goes on and on and on forever. So for example, if, let me pull up an example here. If I were, let's see here. All right, so a loop is obviously something that just repeats over and over. So probably a good example, let me pull up Excel. That would be a bad example there. Let's do new. All right, perfect. Let me minimize that. Let's do this. This might be better. All right. So let's say that we have team name, and our team name is the Steelers. All right. So it's there one time. So we know that the Steelers is once, and say we want to have a loop that loops through and just maybe repeats the same thing over and over. So what it does is it copies Steelers one after another after another. So what would happen is a loop would just keep going through and loop and input Steelers over and over until you told it to stop. And that is what a loop is. A loop just keeps going through and grabbing information. Another thing is, let's say that we have a loop, and this loop is going to identify certain information. So let's say that we have specific information. So let's go with TV shows. All right. So we have TV show number one. We have the green arrow. Well, arrow. Okay. And then we have Flash. Then we have Supergirl. And then we have Supernatural. And then we have what's another good show? We could put we have Shameless. All right. So we have these 5 TV shows, right? And you notice here, this is the ID, so it's an identifier identifies what we're looking at. It's the unique ID that we're looking at. And this right here is the TV show that we're discussing. So what would happen in a loop, it would grab this information. Let's say that we had an output, okay? And the output would grab the information. So it would start off, and the loop starts off at 0. So it'd be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? So it would go in and say, hey, give me the value for 0. And it would be your object.0, whatever the case is, and it would print out error. And then what it would do is, it would actually, you'd have like an int I equals 0, and then you would have, you'd have maybe a loop. So let's say that you had another integer, and you called it num, and it equals 0, but you would have num, something like that. So every time the error would go, every time the loop would go through, that number would increase. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that value would keep changing. Now what would happen is once it reaches the end of the loop, then the file stops. Now why is this easy? Is because when you're developing something, let's say once again, I'll go back to that individual I talk about in class, Pickles. He had over 1,000 lines of code, and there was instances where he could have used a loop. Maybe he didn't know how to use a loop. He didn't want to use a loop. He just did what he had to do to go in. And you could do that way, but that makes a lot of time. So let's say, for an example, let's say that you have an Excel worksheet, and you have, someone gives you this Excel sheet and says, hey, you know what? There's 50,000 lines on here. I need you to go through and maybe grab out all the unique values, such as maybe people that were born in Pittsburgh. Now you could do that easily. You could, but I want you to put it in a database. Okay, that's where it gets difficult. So you can write a program that queries off Excel and just loops through and looks for that specific spot. So that is an example of a loop. The loop body is a block of statements. Iteration, just talk about that. That's the num++. So 3 types of loops. There's the while loop, it's controlled by a boolean. So you'll have while value equals true, or while, usually it's while value equals true. So let's say that you're running some type of scheduled job, and it's called job. You'll say while job is true. What happens is job is interacting somewhere. That value is interacting, and while it's true, it's going to keep running. But once that value is false, then it stops. Now for is a concise format which it executes. So for would be if you had let's see, let me go back to text edit. All right, so a for loop is usually from start to finish. So for example, you might have for 1 to 10. Okay, that means once it gets to 10, then it stops. But in your for loop, that 1 that I had there could be a unique identifier. It could be an integer, for example. That integer could be some type of value. Let's say that it starts off at 0. And the end part could be the 10 could also be, say, integer n. So you have start and end. So whatever you want n to be, n could change every time. You could have n come from a data service, a web service. You could have n being pulled from a database. That number could change anytime. And then your do while. The loop controlling Boolean expression is last statement. So you do until the while is met. And we'll talk about why you would use one over the other. All right, so this right here is talking about loop structures. It's showing you Boolean expression, true, do this, false, stop, while loop. Executes a body statements continually. As long as the Boolean expression, it controls entry in every loop, it continues. So it consists of the keyword while, followed by a Boolean expression with parentheses, followed by a body loop. Can be single statement or a block of statements surrounded by a curly brace. A definite loop performs a task predetermined number of times, also called a counted loop. Write a definite loop. It initializes a loop control variable. The variable whose value determines whether loop execution continues. So the loop control variable does not pass limiting value. The program continues to execute the body while the loop. So as you see here, you declare your values, and you have while 1 is less than limit, which is 11, output LCV, which is your number, and this is LCV equals LCV plus 1. So that is just your iterator. Another way you could do is LCV plus plus. Writing a definite loop continue. An infinite loop, a loop that never ends, can result from a mistake in a while loop or do not write intentionally. Now I wrote this not intentionally. Now let me tell you, how do I stop it? I had to go to my task manager and kill a program because it just kept going and going. It was taking up all my space. Don't do, while 4 is greater than 2. We know that 4 is never going to be greater than 2, at least in this lifetime. So that loop will end because the tested expression is always true. Oops. Okay. Suspect to an infinite loop. So the same output is displayed repeatedly. The screen remains idle for an extended period of time. To exit an infinite loop, press and hold Control, then press C or break. Or if you're using a Mac, go into what you would do is you go into Activity, Monitor, and then you would find your app that you're running, and then you would kill it. So for example, I'm running a disk space. If I wanted to, I could click the X and that would kill my app. So that's what you want to do from an Apple standpoint. In this case, running an indefinite loop. Continue. Loop count equals 1. While loop count is less than 3, it outputs it. And as you see here, while it's outputting, it will keep doing this. And we'll do this on Thursday. We'll go through and create some loop programs, play around with test it, and so forth. Prevent the while loop from executing infinitely. Oh my gosh, I can't talk. The name loop control variable is initialized to starting value. The loop control variable is tested in a while statement. So if the test expression is true, the body of the while statement takes action. The test while statement must eventually evaluate false. So in this example here, it tells you don't do it. It has a loop count equals 1, while loop count is less than 3. The output and the loop count has no effect. See where the loop control variable is not altered in the loop. So, because it's saying loop count equals loop count plus 1. So it's not going to work. Let's see here. All right. Don't do it. Another example, don't do it. Let me move on. All right, so incrementing the variable. So that would be like your value equals value plus 1 or your value plus plus. Alter the value of a loop control variable by adding 1. So you always have to do that because if you don't add 1, guess what? You're going to get the same value every time. So when you decrease the variable, subtract 1. So let's say you have value equals value. What would you do? Minus 1. If you're adding 1, plus 1. You can also do plus 2. But it has to be a rare circumstance you would want to do that. Clearest and best method. Start the loop control variable at 0 or 1. Now I recommend 0. Always start your value at 0. That's your lowest number and that's the best method. Increment by 1 each time through the loop. Stop when the loop control variable reaches the limit. Let's see here. As you see here, loop count equals 3. While loop count is greater than 1, which is fine, system output hello. Loop count equals loop count minus 1. An indefinite loop, altered by the user input, controlled by the user, executed any number of times. Validating data, ensure a value falls within a specified range. Use an indefinite loop to validate input data. If a user enters incorrect data, the loop repeats. So in this example here, we have public static void main. It has double balance. It's declaring your value. It's using a scanner input. While response equals 1. You know, this right here will be a good exercise for you guys to enter. Maybe we'll have you do that. Validating data, ensuring that data falls within a specific range. Your priming read, input retrieved before the loop is entered. Within a loop, the last statement retrieves the next input value and checks the value before it's entered. Here's another example of a while loop. Validating data, output, and so forth. Using shortcut arithmetic. Accumulating, repeating the increasing value at the same amount. So Java provides shortcuts. So we have the plus equals, adds as a sign operator, subtract, multiply, divide, and remainder. Using arithmetic, prefix plus plus, as we mentioned, some value plus plus. Use only with variables. Other operators increases value by 1. So if we had value, like for example, if we had value, let me put a new line here. So if we want to do value equals value plus 1, that's one way. Another way is value plus plus. That adds an increment on the value. Those are the ones that we want to concentrate on. And value, this right here is just showing you the values, operators. Prefix plus plus. Let's see, moving on. This right here is just using, all right, it has int number, answer, my number equals 17, output, my number is my number, plus my number, so it adds on and so forth. Pretty straightforward. Creating for loop. For loop, use when you have a definite number of loop iterations. Now, yeah, like I said, if you know that the value is always going to be between 1 and 10 or 1 and 20, great. But you also can make this dynamic. So when I say dynamic, it could be something that the user is entering in. That value could change any time. So you have for val equals 1. Val is less than 11 plus plus val, which adds on, or you could do val plus plus, or you could val equals val plus 1, but the plus plus val or the val plus plus works. But you're saying that for 1 to less than 11, so for 1 to 10 is what you're looking for. Output the value. So what it'll do is it'll start off at 0, 1, and continue on. Val equals 1. Another way is while val is less than 11, output, and then plus plus val. And what it does is it keeps printing a number unless it's less than 11. Let's say that we wanted to say while val is greater than 1. What do you think would happen? If your value is 1 and you say while val is greater than 1, it'll never stop. And we'll do that in class. Other uses for 3 selections of a for loop. Initialization of more than one variable. Performance of more than one test using and or operators. Decreasing the performance of some task, altering one value. Creating a for loop continued. Moving on. Do while. A post-test loop checks the value of the loop control variable at the bottom of the loop after one repetition has occurred. Perform tasks at least one time. All right, here's another example of a loop, do while loop, so you can kind of copy this and try this on your own time. Inner loop and outer loop. Inner loop must be entirely contained in an outer loop. So to print 3 mailing labels for each 20 customers, you have 4 customers equals 1, customers less than equals 20, and then you're able to get an output from that. Improving loop performance. Make sure that you use a loop that does not include unnecessary operations or statements. So if you know you're not going to use it, don't use it. Consider order of evaluation, make comparisons to 0, and employ the loop fusion to combine loops. Do not use unnecessary operations or statements within your loop. Avoid while x is less than a plus b. Instead, use int sum equals a plus b. Let's skip that. All right. Employ loop fusion. It's a technique of combining 2 loops into one. Will not work in every situation, so it depends on what you're doing. Prefix incrementing value plus plus x. When a method receives a reference to x, the value is increased. We talked about that. There's another example here. So basically what we talked about is a loop to validate data entries. We talked about nested loops. We talked about definite loops, such as your for loop. Don't forget to block multiple statements. Don't make the mistake of checking for valid data. Summary, we talked about loops today. So this right here is a video of what you would get in class. It's a little bit shorter because there's no interaction between us together. You're more welcome to read it, or you can listen to me go on about the loops. So if you have any questions, on Thursday we will get together and we'll do some labs and we'll go from there. If you have any questions, please reach out. Thanks and have a nice day.